Hello, my name's Ray, and I decided that I would, in my retirement, start a few videos and post them on places like YouTube about subjects that interest me and that I've been curious about probably all my life, and hopefully would interest some of the people on YouTube that listen to this kind of thing. I suppose the rest is politics has been a big influencer on me doing this because I really enjoy that particular podcast with Rory Stewart and Alastair Campbell. All my working life I have been involved in finance in one kind or another. I'm an accountant, so obviously I pretty well understand commercial business and company accounts and all that kind of thing. And in my later career, I dealt with fraud for one of the UK's largest banks. But one of the things that has really confused me, if you like, and certainly piqued my interest is what causes world wars, basically. I mean, it's very easy to say that, well, they're caused by this event or that person. But what allows those events to occur, and in some cases anyway, what allows somebody to come to power? What is it that makes them popular enough to come to power? Or if it's not a single person, then what is it, that gets umpteen different countries involved in it? And in particular, one of the things that is interested me is the lead up to World War II and how on earth Germany came to power and had such a massive army, air force, and was able to invade with something called blitzkrieg, with all the numbers and equipment that they had, particularly when after the First World War there was something called the Treaty of Versailles, which, amongst other things, forbade them to have an air force, limited their number of personnel in the military to, I think it was 100,000, and all kinds of other restrictions, one of which was a reparation for the cost of the damages done to, if you like, the winning sides in the First World War. And the result of that was that a lot of Germans thought that the terms of it were too draconian, disrespectful to German people, and of course it absolutely destroyed the German economy. You could wake up in the morning and a loaf of bread would cost 10 marks or whatever they were called at the time, but in the afternoon that could have multiplied by hundreds or thousands, and sights of people carrying or pushing wheelbarrows full of marks to do their daily shopping was not uncommon. And so inflation was rampant, unemployment was terrible, something like 30 or 40%, I think it was, in the 1920s. And then, of course, they had the Wall Street crash in 28, I think it was. And all of that, and the dissatisfaction amongst German people, not just about the economy, but about them being belittled and defeated and feeling or feeling as though the rest of the world felt that they were in some way lesser people than, it damaged their pride anyway. And suddenly Hitler appears on the scene and the Nazi Party, and promises to sort all that out. Now, he could not have sorted that out as he said he would, by abiding to the Treaty of Versailles, because they just had not got the economy to do that. So he did nothing but just ignored it, and very secretly he managed to build up one of the biggest armies the world has ever known in secret, which has always intrigued me, is how on earth did he do it? And I've been researching that, and it's by historians and scholars of the world wars. I'm sure they already know the answer, but I didn't, so I thought I'd find out. And he basically did it by what is now known as a Ponzi scheme. So, as I've said earlier, the economy of Germany was wrecked after the First World War and just got worse in the ensuing 10 or 15 years. So there was no way that he could build up and buy an army from the German economy, because there just wasn't the money. There was no gold or anything like that, and I'll come back to that later. So how did he do it? He had to buy tanks, or at least he had to order tanks to get them manufactured, aircraft, even though they were banned under the Versailles Treaty. He had to employ soldiers, all the things that, weaponry, bullets and shells and anything you can think of that to do with war. So how on earth did he do it? Well, the short answer is he didn't, but a chap called Schacht, who was a very senior banker at the time, came up with a scheme whereby he could raise the money necessary without it actually ever appearing as money raised by the government. And he did it, as I said earlier, by a kind of Ponzi scheme. Now, those of you that don't know what a Ponzi scheme is, it's basically named after a chap who sold notes to people in the early 20th century. I think it was about 1917 or something like that. And on the promise that you buy my notes and you'll get a massive return, and I'll repay you a bit later on. And the only way you could finance that was by selling more notes, until there comes a point where he can't sell enough notes to repay the people the notes that they'd already bought. So that's what a Ponzi scheme is. It's kind of a pyramid thing, which is ultimately will always fail. And there's been more recent examples of it, with Madoff and one or two others in recent years. But anyway, getting back to Hitler and the Nazis, what Schacht did was to create a company. Now, I can't pronounce the name of the company, but basically by creating a company, he allowed it to be secret because it was a company, nothing to do with it. There was no particular connection to the government. And this company was given orders by the government, by the Nazi Party, to say, build me 1,000 tanks or whatever. They then passed that on to the manufacturing companies. But instead of paying the manufacturing companies with money, they paid them with a note. And it's interestingly, the notes were carried interest. So let's say that, I don't know, 1,000 tanks cost 1 million marks. They said, well, we will. You can have payment in a note worth 1 million marks. You can get interest on that note, discount, whatever you want to call it, interest on that note, but you can't cash it for 6 months or whatever. But then you can take it to a bank, and the bank will give you the money in exchange for the note. And of course then the bank had to get the money, because remember, the economy had got no money. And so they simply went back to the central bank, Reichsbank I think it was called, who just printed more money. No value to it, but it worked for many years. And everything was done in secret. So these notes, I think they were called Metto notes or something like that. These notes were basically what financed Hitler's war machine. So it wasn't that he got the economy moving. I mean, he did build the autobahns, and of course his whole economy was built on war and war equipment manufacturing. But it was all done by money that they knew eventually the government couldn't pay back. And of course, the one thing that printing money does, if you do it on a large enough scale, is to cause inflation. And he knew that. So what was his answer? Because he knew that, his bubble was going to burst by 1939, because these notes eventually had expired or come to the point where they had to be repaid, and he couldn't do it. So what did he do? Well, he invaded countries where he could raid their resources, and by resources I mean gold. So Austria, Poland, Czechoslovakia, places like that, so that he could shore up his economy. And in fact, when he invaded these countries with the Blitzkrieg, one of the first things he did was to grab hold of their precious metals, gold and things like that. And of course that then enabled them to strengthen their own economy by pillaging the economy of the countries they invaded. Anyway, that's my understanding of what happened in the Second World War. So although Hitler always said, oh, it's about Lebensraum or living room, and for my people and all this sort of thing, it was actually a bit of a con, because it was really all about money, or lack of money in his case. And you could see modern day comparisons with it, which I will cover in my next little video, and I hope that people find it interesting. I certainly find it fascinating what motivates these monsters, or whatever you want to call them, these authoritarians that seem to either take power by, killing all their enemies, as in fact Hitler did. But Hitler, don't forget, was elected. Why was he elected? Well, he was elected because he promised the Germans, who were feeling downtrodden and unappreciated by the rest of the world, that he would make them great again. We've heard that somewhere else very recently by somebody. But he did it by a Ponzi scheme. So the cynic in me finds that quite amusing, which I shouldn't really, because it's not funny at all. But that's how I believe he did it. And that's the main reason why he invaded the countries that he did, at least at the very start. Anyway, I hope you found that interesting, and I'll talk to you again when I do my next video shortly.